So, as a board member and as an executive guiding more than one company, I feel somewhat conflicted by the AI opportunity, and perhaps others listening can relate. So on the one hand, I want to encourage adoption of AI. I want to encourage the benefits it can bring, speed to market, scaling teams, the indefatigable 24/7 automation that only an agent can do, working while we sleep, kind of like a Roomba for your IT. But on the other hand, I'm nearly frozen stiff with panic by the idea that I couldn't really tell you with any certainty exactly how far and wide this experiment has spread. And more importantly, what risks, and I'm going to be selfish here, I might be exposed to. And I really do mean me, because as a company director, which in many countries, for example, mine in Australia, comes with non-trivial legal liabilities, it's pretty frightening. And that's before any regulatory or compliance requirements. 20 years ago, we would have called it shadow IT, and it was a headache then. Today, we'd call it shadow IT, and it's possibly a nightmare. The question for today's guest is, what, if anything, can we do about it? Welcome to another episode of the AI Forecast, proudly sponsored by the amazing folks at Cloudera. I'm your host, Paul Muller. Join me along with leading companies and industry experts as we explore the past, the present, and the future of data and AI in the enterprise. Well, today we're joined by Lisa Pent. Lisa is the CEO and founder of PentEdge and the creator of the AI monitoring and governance system, AIMS. She joins us today to talk about deploying AI with Guardrails. I'm really excited. Welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
I'm thrilled to be here. Nice to meet you, Paul. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. I'm going to jump into the topic that we talked about in the opening, but before we do that, as our listeners know, we kind of like to have dessert before dinner on this podcast. We do our lightning round at the start. Are you ready to do it?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. What would people know you best? It can be work friends. It can be work colleagues, I should say, friends, family. What would people who know you best say as your superpower?
Basically translating concepts between diverse audiences. So maybe in this case, it would be technologists, board members, and then people who are actually inside institutions doing work.
You're the person who bridges the gap between different audiences.
Yes.
A super important role. All right. Next up, we talk about technology a lot. For you, what's the most impactful technology of all time?
I was inclined to say AI, but I know a few other folks have said it. So I went a little further back in time. And I think this one's pretty relevant, which is double entry bookkeeping, which is about 500 years old now. I thought that one would get you.
Excellent answer. I'm very excited by that.
It was essentially the first anti-fraud tool, which I think is kind of cool to think about. And if you think about shadow AI, which has become really prevalent, that is single entry.
My mind's just blown. We're going to have a great conversation. All right, next up. What would you like to see AI automate for you in your future?
Universally, anything that's documentation related. I just think that there's so much, quote unquote, like paperwork that's still out there. I think the best relatively recent example is during COVID, the U.S. government launched a program known as the PPP loans, which were loans from the Small Business Administration to help fund small businesses. And it was great. And it was a great opportunity for community financial institutions to help their local communities. But it was essentially paperwork, and it was dedicated people inside community banks and credit unions literally working weekend because of the intensity of the documentation side. If we can take that away, I just see a world where a lot of good things can happen faster and more efficiently.
Anything that can fill out forms for me, I'll be a big fan of. Nothing worse than feeling like when you go to do something, it feels more like a test than becoming a customer, right? All right. Last but not least, you've been working with data for a long period of time. You are the first guest to say double entry bookkeeping was an amazing technology. So that shows your hand. But what are some of the best practices or tips or tricks you've got for the listeners that you've got as someone who's been working with data for so long?
I think data lineage is the number one thing. If you think about how it has Evolved or not evolved. I mean, in my early banking career, it was literally having to physically write your initials to show that you saw something and that you were signing off on it. And so that was data, that was early data lineage. And to me, that's what AI can do really well. And I try to actually explain that to executives and board members. Like, do you realize that AI can actually be a better paper trail than any human?
I love that idea. Data lineage is one of those funny terms we've talked about on the show a couple of times. And I don't have a deep financial services background. I had a passing relationship with it in my career, but it seems to be a term that really is very much a financial services concept. You don't hear it a lot in other places, yet it's such a powerful idea, especially in this sort of world of AI, where you do really want to know not only where the data came from, but what's been done to it, and not just by who, but possibly by what.
Right. And then what decisions are being made and who's making those decisions. And so it kind of keeps going on.
Yeah, it feels like there's 90% of the world's not even talking about this topic. It's, there's a couple of industries that are really deep in it, and the rest of the world just hears the words and kind of goes, I don't really know what they mean. I'll just get on with the rest of my day. Something we should do something about. So let's talk about this notion of of AI with guardrails, which I loved, by the way. As I sort of opened up on today's premise, am I right in thinking that AI is spreading faster and further than my ability to oversee any potential risks? Is my instinct right? This thing feels like it's good, but it's possibly out of control and maybe going to do me harm if I don't keep an eye on it.
The short answer is absolutely. It's moving faster than you can even imagine, than even I can imagine, frankly. Even in some of the most conservative institutions that theoretically have policies in place, it's still happening.
I suppose the executive in me, I wouldn't describe myself as type A, but I definitely like to feel like I've got my fingers on everything. Is my CEO OCD, for want of a better term, taking over, or am I right to be worried and feeling like I need to be doing something about this?
Definitely need to be doing something, and it needs to be governance, right? So,
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it was early May of this year. There was a community financial institution which ended up having to file what's called an 8K with the SEC, basically admitting that one of their team members had put customer social security numbers, names, and birth dates in ChatGPT.
Okay, that's an example of where it could go wrong.
That's an example of where it could go wrong and where it probably is going wrong as we speak.
So I've got another follow-on question as we're setting this up. Because as I said, genuinely in the opening, these are all the thoughts going through the back of my mind in my own businesses, which is part of the instinct. I was talking to one of my fellow directors today is, well, do you just stop it? Do you try and take control and say, well, the answer is, because it is kind of the obvious answer, is the simple solution to auditing AI is you ban it, and therefore you don't need to worry about it anymore. There's nothing to audit. There's nothing to look for. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that someone just then does that work on their phone or on a personal device. I've had bank executives say to me, well, can you, if someone brings their work home and literally does it on their home laptop, can you figure that out? And the answer is no, you can't, right?
Got it.
Privacy laws prevent us from doing that. So you do want those policies in place, and you do want a method to make sure that they're adhered to.
Let's talk about that. So you then taking that approach, you've worked in the financial services industry for how long now?
Over 40 years.
And tell us a bit about your background. Is it from that sort of audit compliance area, or what's your background?
Well, I started my career working in community banks. So that's one of the reasons why I understand that space. There's 4,500 of them here. And then I went to Wall Street and worked as an investment banker until the financial crisis. And then I moved to work at a number of different technology companies, including Thomson Reuters and Cognizant, where I had some global roles there. But my clients and the products were all related to financial services. You've
been advising companies about how to deploy technology, obviously in that banking finance segment. When did you, I guess I shouldn't say become aware of, but when did it occur to you, or how did it occur to you that this, I guess we called it shadow AI, was not only a thing, that it was going to start to create a compliance and governance problem?
Almost when it came out, when it really launched, the banker side of me was like, oh wow, that will be great for things like data lineage. And then you start hearing stories about how fast the technology is moving, and that right away should make anyone go, that's going to cause challenges for anyone in a governance role in any regulated industries when things are actually moving that fast. Because you will always have people who will want to adopt it, and then you will have people who will pretend like it's not happening for a while.
Yeah, or try to block it, right? I think that's the other thing. We tried to do it with shadow IT. People tried to ban it, and it didn't really work. It kind of sent it underground, to your point, or, people found ways of accomplishing it, possibly making the problem even worse because no one was trying to coordinate at that point in time. You discovered the problem and you obviously started to investigate it. One of the questions I suppose I would have coming to someone like yourself would be, all right, so I'm going to try and foster and encourage AI deployment. I'll have some policies and guidelines, but ultimately I can't, let's put it this way, every software vendor on the planet's trying to retrofit AI into their solutions. So before too long, everything will have an AI element to it to a greater or lesser degree. The issue becomes, how do I testify, for want of a better term, to the state of my, to the deployment level of my estate, to the behaviors, short of asking everyone to confess what they're doing. How do you get that done? It's a mammoth task.
Even before you do that, you need to make sure, and I'll talk to you now as with your board member hat on.
Yeah, please.
You need to make sure that the executives actually are acknowledging that it is in all of those tools. And that, I will say, is probably it's the number one thing that I'm bumping up against, is having conversations with financial institution CEOs who say we're not really using it yet.
Oh, so we're still in a little, what do they call it? The 7 stages of grief. We're still in denial.
Oh, 100%. To me, that's maybe, and so I have literally been reaching out to board members and saying, guiding them, like if the executives aren't going to acknowledge that more than 3 people in their organization, which they believe that they have permission to use Copilot, for example, if they don't understand that it's already in every SaaS product that they have in their environment, that's a challenge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I'm not thinking, because I'm, I guess, a tech-savvy board member. To me, it's the opposite. As I'm like, it'll be everywhere.
Yes.
What you're saying is there are a bunch of people who are sitting there thinking, Hogan. I'm sorry, that's how old I am. I still think of Hogan as a banking system. Give me a modern banking system piece of software, but it'll be built in at some point in time to just about everything. Not even office automation. We're talking right into core banking, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually what we mean. Every bank in this country uses a core banking system made by one of like 4 different companies, and they all are using AI, and they've been using it for a while. So when an executive looks me in the eyes and says, "Oh, well, we're not really using it yet," I say, with all due respect, at a minimum, your core banking provider is using it, right? You might, but then so is your CRM provider. So are all of these other tools that you use within your organization. So I'm kind of I'm setting something up that precedes essentially the question you're asking, but the answer is sort of the same, is whether they're in denial or they're actually acknowledging that it exists, you need monitoring and governance.
Back when we were in my old software business, if we were trying to do software compliance, auditing, for license compliance, it would be a fairly big desk exercise to go around and pull reports, and it was pretty labor intensive and almost invariably wrong and would leave large areas uncovered. Security attestation, if I'm thinking ISO 2000 or 27001 and those sorts of things, again, similar sort of problem, is you could have the paper, but the actual, the reality on the ground would often be very different from what policy looked like. How do you, I suppose, lift the covers and find I shouldn't call them cockroaches because you want them to be there, but how do you find these things? Is there a way of doing it without a lot of manual intensive interviewing and auditing?
So the short answer is yes, but I don't want to discourage people from taking the manual route because
Okay.
I think that's still useful. So if I was an examiner, what most examiners look at today, bank and financial institution examiners to answer the AI question is literally a compilation of a physical questionnaire that institutions send to their vendors, that they send to their core provider, that they send to Salesforce, that has a set of questions, right? So they're asking the vendors to essentially self-attest, right? So that's definitely a manual piece. And I also think many of the organizations also have a questionnaire that they send to their employees relating to the tools they're using. And some of that's done by, let's say, the procurement office, just to try to look for efficiency. If no one says they're using this tool, then maybe we don't need to keep it. When you want to talk about looking at that from a digital perspective, there's sort of two different things. One is the easiest way to see how it's being used is actually to look at physical log files on a vendor by vendor basis over a time period. That gives you a look back and you can sort of see what behavior is happening inside your organization. But then also using a browser or browser extension, then you essentially see, because most of the tools that people are using are going to be browser-based, that browser extension gives you real-time visibility, but also gives you the ability to set up something that would essentially stop Social Security numbers from being uploaded into ChatGPT.
I've got so many questions here. Let's break it down though. First and foremost, so we've gotten beyond denial and it's sort of state of awareness that we've got to do something about this, or at least that we maybe need to start with a broad sweep, get a sense of, Lisa's told us there's heaps of this stuff out there. I don't really believe her. Do some sort of audit. Well, I'm guessing that happens, right?
No, 100%. Yep.
You run some sort of sweep of the organization, come back and go, well, actually, it's not where is it? It's where isn't it? Like there's 3 places that aren't using it.
Right.
And then the question is, again, at the board level, I suppose, whose job is it to do something about that? Who owns it? Do you remember back in the sort of 2000s, the government was busy appointing SARs? Do you remember everyone was a SAR? There was all, this SAR and that SAR, popular term at the time. It's probably out of date now, but is this the responsibility of the risk and audit team? Is it the responsibility of the executives from each business unit? Who's responsible? Who takes ownership of this?
It's a great question. And what I've been seeing lately is it's evolving. So right now it sits almost by default with risk and audit, but there's a technology element that members of that committee might not always have the ability, because when you're getting on one of those committees, there's other sort of check marks that you need to, were you an auditor? Do you know the rules and regulations, et cetera, et cetera. This is almost asking you to have a different skill set, I think, to be an effective member of a board who's looking at that issue. And so I've been reading about essentially a technology committee that maybe works hand in hand with risk and audit. So the short answer is I think that it's evolving at the board level. So where it ultimately sits is probably going to evolve as well.
But it sounds to me like this is going to be one of those classic initiatives which will need to be cross-functional.
Yes.
In that if it sits with risk and audit, people are going to treat it like a compliance exercise. And if it sits with IT, it'll be seen as possibly an enforcement exercise, whereas it's not either of those things, really, is it? And then the business is going to be sitting there going, well, we've chosen this core banking system that IT is running for us, but really has got nothing to do with IT, and it's a business issue.
Correct. 1,000%.
Talk to me then about what you learned about, in this process. You've gone through, and as we talked about, you've created, I think the acronym you've got for it is AIMS, this sort of notion of AI monitoring and governance system. Tell us about what inspired that and how people go about implementing something like this, that methodology.
So when I started PentEdge, I mostly approached it from a pure consulting perspective. That sort of blend of governance and technology, like we were just talking about a minute ago, that you need at the board level. That wasn't really solving the problem that I was trying to solve. I realized that a much simpler way would essentially be a tool or a product that would help them do that. And so the number one thing, whether it's our AIMS tool or it's anything else, is having a complete inventory of all of the AI that's in your environment. And there's a couple of different ways to do that, as I mentioned. One is sort of the log file approach. There's also the personal attestation. Then you can also use the browser approach, but you want to make sure that you have an inventory. And the other piece that I think that's really important, and this would be important to you as a board member, is risk is not equal across all of those tools. So let's just say you're at a board meeting and someone produces an inventory of all of the AI that's being used within an organization. They're not all equal from a company risk perspective, right? So if you think about it, in the financial services world, a tool, a loan operating, relative loan processing tool, has all of that personal data, is going to be more risky than maybe the data that's in your vendor management tool. But they both use AI and they're both on that inventory sheet. So they need to be viewed from a risk perspective differently. So that's sort of the thing I'm trying to coach organizations on, is you need to understand where it exists, where it's being used, how it's being used, but then you also want to look, they're not all created equal from a company risk perspective, and you need to look at that.
We've got that, I suppose it's classic risk and audit, right? Where you're, well, it's really more risk management, where you've got that business process element of things, and you're trying to, I suppose, for want of a better term, determine the blast radius of an actual risk occurring or that event occurring. And, is it business critical? Does it require you to, inform a regulator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, got it. So it is very much that same methodology, but looking at it through that technology lens and building, I suppose it goes back to, are you aware of where it's being deployed and what it's touching?
Right. Which in my mind, when I first started thinking about this and approaching conversations, I thought that would be sort of an easy thing, because this is, as you just mentioned, thinking that theoretically already exists particularly within regulated institutions.
I still find it incredible to find a lot of organizations, and I shouldn't say this because I'm guilty of it myself now that I think about it, but it's so easy to preach, like, armchair quarterback these things. Is how many companies don't even have an inventory of their business processes, critical business processes.
Yes.
So, if you don't know that, it's pretty hard to then know what AI is touching and whether or not it's going to have an impact to, you say, on PII or other matters. So this is kind of also good hygiene, for want of a better term, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And also you want it to be whatever tool you I hope people end up using a tool, because obviously I think hopefully we just established that the manual approach is not going to be your most effective one, or your most, the one measuring risk the best. So hopefully whatever tool you're using, you need to make sure that it has a continual element and not just a point in time element. So that's another thing that I'm expecting to see and already are starting to see, is people will produce this AI inventory report and maybe even risk score what's in their inventory. And then that's it. And the auditors aren't coming back until 2027, so I'll talk to you then. So I'm hoping to see that thinking evolve, and hopefully that evolves at the board level as well.
So you mentioned there have been some, I don't like to use the word breaches, but it's the best synonym I can think of. There have been some occurrences of, whether it's PII or other things, finding their way to places that they shouldn't, and they're AI adjacent, let's just say that. It's typically when, I'm thinking about my background in cybersecurity, it's when you have a public breach that suddenly two things happen. People worry about getting their house in order, but the auditors think, well, where there's smoke, there's fire, so let's go and check out everyone else. And I talk about auditors, but you use the word examiners. I suppose we're talking about similar functions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What's the sort of climate at the moment from your standpoint? Is it how much scrutiny is being applied to this right now?
In my personal view, not enough. So what I mean by that is, in talking to executives, even over the last week, what I'm hearing is that when The auditors are still happy with the report that they're being given. That's essentially, as I mentioned, the compilation of those manual outreaches, right? So it's old information. The second they get it, it's old, right? It was old when they were assembling all that data. There's nothing that's sort of continual about it. And it's also not risk measured, right? So it's like vendor X, do you use AI in your product? What LLM does it use? And then you're also taking all of that on face value. You're not essentially digitally validating the information that you're getting back from these manual outreach exercises. So I don't think the examiners or auditors are moving fast enough with the questioning.
I think something might be happening though. I noticed recently I got a slew of effectively EULAs, so end user license agreement emails sent to me for a various number of cloud services I'm using that specifically mentioned third-party data processing.
Yes. Yep.
And I thought, there you go. So there's a bit of pressure now starting to appear.
Yes.
Letting me know there may be third-party data processing taking place, which implies that someone's starting to worry about this, certainly in the larger, better-funded companies. And I guess this is the other issue we see is, in bigger companies, there's a home for this. As you get to, smaller pension funds or smaller community banks, etc., do you find they're just under-resourced for this kind of activity?
Yes, and that's actually the whole reason why I started my company, is because I want those institutions to not have to have an army of technologists in order to be able to adopt the technology. That, in a lot of cases, has been the main reason why they haven't been adopting it. They don't have the team. They might not trust outsourcing some of the functionality, but there's no reason why they shouldn't have an opportunity to take advantage of some of the benefits, like data lineage.
I mean, I should ask the question, and if you don't mind, and feel free to plead the fifth on this. Where do you sit on? You mentioned it a little bit at the beginning when you talked about its benefits for data lineage, but where do you sit on the opportunity for deploying these technologies in banking finance looking forward?
You mean in a net new way?
Like, how aggressively would you be pushing the lever for adoption? Do you think it's something where we need to be holding back, or we should be, I won't say aggressively, but, is it something that we should be accelerating? Where do you sit on that?
I say accelerating for a really simple reason, which is cost efficiency.
Yeah, okay.
At a minimum, even if I wasn't doing what I do all day long, I would want to coach organizations into reducing the number of SaaS products that they're using. They're all using far too many for the size of the organization. And I believe that there are a lot of efficiencies that can be gotten from just helping people understand how they're using technology. But now you sort of put the overlay of AI on that, and now you're bringing in something that in itself is efficient and in itself can replace a lot of these outdated SaaS tools that they're using.
One of the mechanisms for doing that is this notion of deploying agents or agentic technologies.
Yep.
How do you think the governance problem shifts or changes as we start to look at more of these autonomous agentic technologies, in your opinion?
I would think about that the same way that thinking at the board level has to shift. In the sense that you need to ask more questions, you need to ask different questions, and you need to accelerate the pace of questioning. Right? So I think so it's a complete paradigm shift today versus even, let's call it, in the beginning of next year or the end of this year, what have you. Different questions, different pace of questioning, different checkpoints. If you think about how quickly an individual employee can start using a new tool, it's in minutes, right? Particularly if it doesn't need to be downloaded, if it's browser-based. And then how quickly does actual governance thinking change, either at the board level or at the auditor examiner level? That's usually like in quarters, right? It kind of evolves in quarters. So, I mean, that's a big delta. So that whole timing difference needs to change.
There's a lot to think about here. There may be, I'm hoping, a few people in the examiner auditor world listening who are possibly using this as an opportunity to open their eyes, the aperture, as it were, to the scale and scope of the challenges and issues. What advice would you be giving to the examiner auditor community if that's not a third rail topic for you?
I would say anyone literally in any role, anywhere, unless it's, let's say, carpentry or something like that, where you're working with your hands. You need to be thinking about AI. You need to be thinking about how you should adopt it or think about adopting it or learn more about it in order to do your job and continue to stay relevant in the workforce. And I think that's true for examiners and auditors as much as it is for pretty much anyone else.
For people in the software industry listening at the moment who may be needing to provide this information to vendors, they're on the vendor side providing it to procurement. Are there things they could be doing to make or to sort of anticipate the demand that will be coming as a result of this new pressure for attestation?
I would say demand and also competition.
Say more about that.
If I had a SaaS, let's say I had a very successful SaaS product that I put out into the market 10 years ago. If I'm not thinking right now about how that needs to evolve to stay relevant and how I might become quickly irrelevant as a result of this new technology, then I'm not asking myself the right questions and I'm not thinking about things the right way.
Wow, you must be tough in a boardroom. I just never want to be on the opposite side of you. I'm glad we're friends.
I'm very diplomatic, though.
I bet you are. Yeah, smiling assassin, I'm sure. All right, last but not least, speaking of board meetings, if you were to walk into a board meeting, say tomorrow, and you could I'll give you two. You could ask one question and offer one piece of advice or a call to action with regards to AI. What would it be?
The question that I would ask is, who on the board understands the technology, at least at the level that it's likely to have an impact on the business of the board that they're on? I'm not saying you need to be able to start using Claude code, but I am saying that you need to understand what the impact on the business is going to be. And if you have a large number of board members who don't understand that, I would suggest that that needs to be looked at.
If you had a question for them, what would it be?
Do you know what AI is being used in your organization and how it's being used for decision-making and running the business?
Simple but powerful question, and definitely one of those chin scratches, I'm sure. I think that's probably the big takeaway from today's podcast for me is this is definitely a team sport. It's a multifaceted one, and one that, to your point, is not something that we can set, forget, check the box off and get to next year. It's going to be a rapidly moving problem space or opportunity space, depending on how you want to look at it. And I suppose more so probably even than cybersecurity in terms of everyone's in a rush to deploy or think they're in a rush to deploy AI, but they're not necessarily thinking about what are we going to do to govern it appropriately. Absolutely brilliant stuff. If people listening are interested in learning more about AIMS or your other work, where can they go to learn more?
thepentedge.com.
Perfect stuff. I've gone and had a look at the website. It's great stuff. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you, Lisa. That's been wonderful having you on.
It's been fun. I enjoyed meeting you. Great conversation.
Absolutely. Well, with that, that's a wrap. If you've got any questions or comments about today's episode, we always love to hear from you. So do drop a line in the comments section on whatever podcast you happen to be listening on, or you could hit us up on LinkedIn. You can use the handle @Cloudera. We love to hear from you. We've got a tremendous array of guests coming up. So if you have enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you have, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss another drop. Thanks again to Cloudera for hosting another episode of the AI Forecast podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. You don't have radios. I don't know why I say tuning in. I mean listening in, downloading in. And we'll see you all. I won't see you. You'll see me next week.